in the email, Sean. So what we do is we'll just go around and just introduce one another, so everybody knows everyone. And yeah, just kind of say a little bit about yourself. Should we start with Evan?
Sure. I'm Evan. I am a actor, writer, producer. I studied at Stella Adler with Michael and Madison in a 2-year conservatory program, currently based in Los Angeles.
Excellent.
Amazing. Madison?
I'm Madison. I studied at Stella Adler. I'm a writer and actor, also in Los Angeles.
Amazing. And then
My old home. I just moved out.
where moved you, Sean, now? Where are you in New York?
Santa Barbara.
Ah, okay.
Nice.
Just out of the city. You know what? It was time. It was time to get out of the city, and the pandemic was just like, that was like the icing on the cake. It's like, all right, these places are just, they're already toxic. They're just too much. They're rolling out the 5G in all the major cities, and it's just like, if you don't have electric pollution, physical pollution, toxic atmosphere, toxic mentality in people, just get out of the cities.
I remember I actually went to Ojai this year, and like the difference between that area and Los Angeles it's like 2 different countries.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We were up in Ojai for like almost 6 weeks during the whole like lockdown.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then Hannah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Hannah. I was born and raised in London, UK, but I'm originally Iranian. I just finished my first year at Lee Strasberg Film and Theatre Institute, and I am going home to London in about 2 weeks.
Nice. Where are you now?
I'm still in New York. I've actually
New York, right?
I stayed here during the lockdown to make sure I was on the same time zone as my classes.
You found green somehow. That doesn't look like New York.
Yeah, I'm slightly north. I lied.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Nice. Before you introduce yourself, Mike, I'm just going to let Elliot and Chris in, and then I think that's everyone. Elliot, you there? Chris? This bit's always fun when people just start connecting. Elliot, can you hear us? I don't think you can. We'll carry on, and then I'm sure you'll connect any second. Yeah. Chris, can you hear us, right?
Yeah, I can hear you. How you doing, man?
Yeah, you haven't missed much. Obviously, Sean's here today. Everyone's just introducing themselves. Mike's going to introduce himself, and then if you want to do the same, and then when Elliot connects, I think as well. So go for it, Mike.
Sure, yeah. I'm Michael. I went to Stella in LA with Madison and Evan. I just moved back in October. I definitely hear you on the fresh air and the fresh atmosphere for sure. I'm an actor first. I'm starting writing. So I'm studying that and trying to hopefully write a couple of screenplays that I have ideas for. And as well as that, I started a theatre company with Zahid, which we're trying to get some productions put up hopefully real soon. Yeah, that's me.
Exciting.
Amazing. And then Chris, do you want to briefly?
Yeah, sure. Well, similar to Michael, I'm from the Dominican Republic, born and raised here, and I currently live here. I'm an actor mainly, but I am starting to write my first screenplay, which is kind of exciting. And I'm considering studying directing next year. I want to stop depending on other people to sort of get where I want to get. I want to be able to create, which is a bit hard as an actor. As a writer, I can write my own stuff. I can direct my own projects. So I want to have a bit more independence to do what I want. But that's me right now.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And then Elliot, do you want to introduce yourself briefly as well?
Yes, hello everyone. Sorry I'm a little late. What are we talking about?
Just a brief introduction, what you do, your name, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's it pretty much.
Initially, I started out studying acting, thought that was my area, and then through, I guess, being pushed by life's little messages, I took the hint and started writing. Really enjoyed the experience, and then I wanted to see if I could write, so I wrote something else to have contrast that was outside of that initial inspiration, and now it's something that I understood why I wasn't pushing to be an actor as much, because I am interested in the overall story and how that can be portrayed to the audience and what I can give there. So I've completed 3 feature films, and interested in learning about how I can move forward here.
Amazing, perfect. Cool, so that's kind of everyone introduced, and we'll just jump straight into it. So I've gone through some questions, which I sent you guys as well, and then obviously Sean's got as well. I'll just go through some questions and then we'll open it up and we'll just do kind of a Q&A. Some of you guys sent questions through. What I'll do is, it'd be easier if you guys just ask them directly. So just once these questions are done, we'll pop hands up and then we'll just kind of go through it. So obviously, Sean, you produce, you direct, and you act. Where does it start? Where did it start for you, and how did you kind of navigate the 3 different fields, and how do they kind of overlap in your experience?
And I write, right? So that's the beginning to me.
Yeah.
Writing to me is the essence, and it's good to hear that you guys are studying the different aspects and different trades, right? For me, it came from childhood. I was acting in films without really even understanding what it was to act. It was just sort of being put in scenes and dressed in costume and given lines and sort of, okay, I'm doing something. I'm not really conscious of what I'm doing at that time. So for me, actually, I always preferred, I was very shy as a kid. I was much more interested in creating and, being behind the scenes and telling, whether it's like when you're a kid playing with your toys or imagining games, right? You're tapping into something that's very essential, very pure. And so I actually started writing when I was like 7. I think I wrote my first short script, it was based on the Goonies, and it was like a treasure hunt. And I wrote it, and I was like, trying to direct it with my friends. And I was like 7 years old. I didn't have the energy to pull that off. But really from that essence of like 7 years old, 10 years old, I think I wrote almost my first script at 10. I got like halfway through it, but I had basically like outlined the whole thing. It was just to say like, it was that primordial thing in me where it's like, you have to feel that urge. I think everyone understands this. Like, you have to feel something burning in you that has to come out, right? And that's really where, the essence of the writing process begins. But it's also the same with acting. It's, it's like, what is that emotion? Once you harness it, it just comes out, and it comes out in the language, it comes out in the mood and the tempo. So for me, it began with, yes, it was like an introduction to that world of cinema. At that point, obviously, it was the highest levels that, most people will never achieve or attain to, but that's okay too. It's like, you can get spoiled also by the nature of what we see oftentimes in the world today. It's like the way that the world is presented to us when it comes to film, TV, like we get very spoiled in the sense of, oh, I can do that too. It's going to be easy. Whereas most people will never get that script, that passion script made as a big feature film. Most people will never, get the opportunity to star in a major movie, right? Or a major TV show. Like, that's just not the destiny of most people. So, you have to like get that out of your head, I think, in a sense of getting out of your own way, to then allow yourself and loosen up into the journey of self-discovery, because that really is what the artist's path is. It's, the artist's path is being able to show up and engage with your craft, whatever that looks like, right? And whether it's putting on a show in a theater, whether it seats 10 people or 100 or thousands, right? And whether it's showing up and performing. I mean, you see street performers and they're still artists. They're still tapping into that craft, right? So at every level of life, it's like you go through this journey, and this has definitely been my journey, is like seeing again, like the highest pinnacles of success. And then, having to go through my own process of making independent films over the last few years. I've done I've acted in films that are, you know, a couple 100,000. I've directed one that was, you know, less than $500,000. I've written one that was less than $500,000. So it's like you work at those budgets and you realize it's a very different game. It's a very difficult process to go through, but ultimately it's as rewarding as the journey for you. You know, it's like if you go in there with the expectation of this is going to be a big hit and I'm going to, you know, make millions of dollars off of it, like, you know, you're probably not going to feel satisfied. That probably won't happen. Or, you know, if it does happen, there's a lot of consequence that comes with it, as we see from the game of celebrity and fame. That's, again, oftentimes sold to us. And it's a sense of, it's illusion, you know. Even, you know, you look at what the tabloids and all this stuff, I mean, they're constantly trying to hypnotize you into this idea of this is what it looks like to be famous. And then meanwhile, the people are just like trying to have a normal life, or they're hooked on drugs, or they're hooked on, you know, they're addicted to their own celebrity. I mean, it's a very difficult thing. So all this is to say that I go back to where, you know, what this all began with, which is like, there's something inside me. It's a story, it's brewing. And at this point, you know, I've written probably 12 plus, I don't know, more than maybe 12 scripts, maybe 15 scripts. I'm not even sure. Some of which are, you know, we're still actively working on getting made. Others, I would say maybe one day, you know, I'll go back to them. But it's like each one reflects a different psychology, a different evolution of my own growth, right? Like where I was that year at that time. And then those stories that stick around, you come back to and you're like, 5 years, 10 years later, you're like, that story still, you know, is with me. Then, you know, there's something essential in it that it's worth, you know, continue to foster and grow, just like plants, like growing a garden or something, right? It's like there are those that, you know, the flowers that bloom and then they're dead, and then those that are perennial, they're not just annual, they're still there year after year, and it's like you can still nurture them, still connect to them, and in the process, hopefully deepen. You know, that's really the essential journey of this whole experience of being an artist, is ultimately just like, how am I deepening each year? Am I getting caught into the illusion of what it looks like to get this project done, or to become successful, or to make it, as opposed to, am I deepening into the truth of who I am and learning from the setbacks and learning from the mistakes, and yeah, exploring myself in a different way, in a different fashion.
And then when you first started writing, you said something about there's a burning desire to write or say something. Now, a lot of young writers that we speak to are always like, I don't know what to write about. Is there something that you do in order for you to go inside, or does that just come up at certain points in life that I need to say this as a writer, I need to say that as a writer? Is there something you can do to stimulate that, or is it just kind of an organic process?
So you're saying when a young writer says they don't know what to write about, or it's like, look, I mean, there's nothing more difficult than staring at a blank page. Every writer will tell you that, right? But just in terms of what you're referring to, as far as they're not sure of how to proceed, or they're just like looking for something to write about at the beginning.
Looking for something to write about, because I'm a firm believer of you should write about things that affect you and touch you the most. Now, a lot of young people at an early age, they don't quite know, and I even went through the same process as well. I was like, I don't know if I should write about this, I don't know if I should write about that. Is there something that you can do in order to not validate what you're thinking, but to bring forth what's really going on inside, if that makes sense? Does that make sense?
Sure. I mean, I think the oldest saying in the book is write what you know. And write what you know doesn't mean, hey, I've never been to war, so I can't write about war. Or, you know, I've never, I don't know, you know, been in the 18th century, I can't write about the 18th century. It's just to say, write what you know when it comes to an understanding, a feeling, a connection, a spirit, right? I can feel a spiritual connection to Malcolm X. It doesn't mean I'm Black. It doesn't mean I'm, you know, I've ever been a civil rights leader or activist, but I can spiritually connect to that character, or, you know, to something that he was standing for, right? That's to say, write what you know in terms of your soul. And our souls, thankfully, are tremendously ancient. We're not here, you know, from just, you know, a few years of life on Earth. I think the more you delve into the artistic exploration, which is really, in its deepest sense, it's the hero's quest. It's, you know, and it's like discovering yourself and realizing that your journey is not just claiming something new, but actually reclaiming something ancient that's inside of you, remembering these moods, these feelings. Why am I drawn to things? You know, it's like you have to ask yourself, since you're young, since you're a child, you're drawn to certain worlds, you're drawn to certain stories, right? You're drawn to certain characters, certain archetypes, right? That's all reflection, I believe, of what your soul knows. And so these are the things that you want to start by writing about, like what really is essential to what your soul is, what you're interested by. And then in terms of saying like, you know, what to write about, it's interesting. I've never had writer's block, but I've also never forced myself to write. And it's something that I always, you know, I advise people to journal, because one thing is, if you don't know what to write about, you can always journal, right? If you're just like, I need the discipline. Thankfully, I'm a Capricorn. And I'm also like, my my moon is in Aries, so I have like the warrior thing. So for me, it's easy to be disciplined. Some people are just lazy, like they can't discipline it that way, or it's very sort of passive. It's very difficult for them to discipline. So for me, it's not hard to discipline. So for me, it's like at the same time, I don't push myself if I don't know what I want to write about. Let's say I don't have inspiration right now. I don't force it. I literally just go with my interests. What am I interested in reading? I might, you know, my background was in history at college. And I always tell artists and anyone working in the arts, study history, study the art, study not just art, like, you know, watching Tarantino movies, which are all reflections of other pop culture images. Like, don't just study pop culture, understand history, because that's where the stories are. You can call it our story, not his story. It's our story, but it's like, that's where the stories are. When you can start to delve into the past and understand that all of life around us is still a reflection of things that have come before. So when you start to expand yourself into that world, you can be inspired and draw upon plays from the past, ancient stories, ancient traditions, and not even just ancient, you know, ancient can be 20 years ago. It can be, you know, 30 years ago, obviously. But the point is just being able to look to areas of interest that then inspire. So, you know, in my case, it was more from history, but that also comes to the very like modern social culture, pop culture, things like this. Always studying, always reading, always absorbing, and then taking it in and sort of, you know, you're an alchemist. That means you transmute, you take the raw materials of the earth, you take the raw materials of things around you, and you write notes. You know, you can jot down dialogue, an idea, you know, a visual, a character, whatever. You just start to you keep a notebook always on you, a pen always on you. You write notes. Okay, something is starting to come to life. You know, just it may be one shot, one image, and it can be like, that's just an image, and it may end up becoming a whole story around that one image that you saw in your mind. But don't force it. You know, that's the thing too. Like, if it, just sit with it. That's the beauty of writing. You literally you know, you take your diary and you journal. I dream journal, you know, things from dreams. And sometimes I'll look back and be like, wow, that could be a movie just in itself. If I have the energy, obviously, but that's another thing. It's like, you don't want to just start writing without the energy to do it, because writing a script is not going to take you less than a month. I don't know if, you know, if the Rocky story is true, that Stallone wrote it in 3 days, but it must have taken years of thought. If it was going to take 3 days, because it's energy. You're literally reverse engineering a nuclear explosion when you create a film or create a script, because you're taking all this energy and having to put it into this capsule that's literally just this page, you know, whatever it is, 100 pages, you know, that's in your hand at the end of the day. But how much thought, energy, emotion had to live and exist to be drawn upon and then put into that script that's sitting there. And how much energy you draw upon is how dense that script's going to become. Mm-hmm. So a lot of scripts floating around are very light. You know, you're sitting here, fluff, fluff, fluff. You're just feeling, and you just, you know, you're writing about your breakfast. You're writing about, hey, I can't stand when I'm reading a script. Hi, how's it going? Fine. How are you? It's like, no, that's ordinary, boring, everyday dialogue. Get that out of there. You want to get to the meat. Every line has intention. Every line has a purpose. It has to keep my interest on the screen, or I'm changing the channel. Like, that's the intensity and the energy that you're bringing to a story. So you can't be like sitting there going, what should I write about? Oh, I'm flipping through the newspaper. Oh, this is a good story. Let me start writing a script about it. It doesn't work that way. You have to literally take the energy and the feeling of something, study it, write notes, outline, sketch, create something that has a structure, like has an intention, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Don't write the whole script, just outline it and bring enough energy and emotion to it such that you can sit there and literally, you could write it in 3 days, I guess, if you're just powering through. But the idea is that you can sit there for that month or 2 months or whatever it takes and actually bring the energy to complete that. Because otherwise it'll just be meandering. Otherwise it'll just go off and it'll be like that, never ending novel or whatnot that just kind of people like start writing and then they just give up on halfway through because it's just too much intensity to clarify the idea from the beginning to the end.
And that brings me on perfectly to my next question. So, there are going to be times and there'll be some people who kind of just write, hey, how are you? And boring conversations like that. Now, as you said, you've got to bring something like to your writing. Now, how much of you as a person and everything, how far should you go in terms of vulnerability when you let yourself out? You pour your soul into your script. How far do you go? And for yourself, is there so far you would go based on what society says, or do you?
We know that art is personal.
Yeah.
Commercial art is not so personal. So I think it depends also. I mean, look, we're in an insane world. It's difficult to know at this point, what is going to sell, what is not going to sell. It's like, it changes by the day, by the minute. We're in a news cycle where, an influencer culture where influencers have more viewership. YouTube has more viewership than, a lot of television shows and movies, right? So it's impossible to advise on what matters to you. It's up to, ultimately, it's your journey. It's your exploration of creation. And, in the case, like I could say, my father took a story, Platoon, which was his personal experience in Vietnam, elaborated it, brought years of emotion and deepened reflection, because it wasn't, the story that he wrote right after Vietnam was a very chaotic script that I think might be available. I don't know, I've read it, but it's more of like The Doors in a sense. It's like, a rebel who's sort of burning the city in a sense. It's not very well structured as a script. It wouldn't have worked. It would have been like a Godard type of film at the end of the day. Maybe it would have worked, if you were doing it at a small budget, experimentally. And so there's no, it's like, you have to recognize that when you're writing something, how do you say, there's different ultimate goals for things, as we know. There's the project that you say, hey, I'm just going to shoot this experimentally and do it for, with my friends, and we can get it made for a few $1,000. And, you push the limits. And then there's, as we know, the commercial side of things, which goes through a million hands, a million eyes. It's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. It's dissected and taken apart. And a lot of times the politics are changed. The politics, get rewritten. The socioeconomic factors and values are analyzed. There's a lot more that goes into that commercial project than just, the writer's initial intention. So I think it just begins with writing from what's personal, what matters to you, and then shopping it, getting eyeballs on it, getting responses. People will give you different feedback. I always say, like, if 2 or 3 people are saying the same thing, it's pretty accurate. It doesn't mean that necessarily they're right and you're wrong. I mean, if you want to go in a direction and push something, and some people won't like it, or they'll react negatively to it, that's part of the artistic process, right? We can't expect everyone to love what we make. That's insane. It's like we have to have discord and division, even though nowadays the media wants you all to think that groupthink is in, and everyone must agree with what is sort of normal, and consensus is like the new phrase, right? Consensus thinking. But that's just not art. Art has to have dissidence. It has to have dissonance and contrast, and it has to, at some level, push. I'm sure a lot of art offends at different levels, but that's also how consciousness grows. So I can't tell anyone where to start and where to stop as far as their own personal story that they want to put in there. But I think that personal is great because that is generally more interesting. It's more exciting. It has more feeling. And then, you know, whether it ends up, hey, it can get made and seen at Sundance as an indie film that, you know, has a certain viewership, more limited generally than one of these, you know, Hollywood scripts. That's fine. I mean, it's getting a movie made is the goal, right? If you're writing the script, that's one of the goals, I should say. Also, self-transformation is actually the deeper goal that you're working through something. Oftentimes by writing the script, you're working through your own junk. You're refining yourself.
And what advice would you give in terms of, there's certain writers from certain backgrounds that they're always represented in a particular light. Now, me being from an Asian background, being Muslim, we're portrayed in a particular way. Now, if I were to go and write something, how have you ever faced the challenge of changing something that's so set on film and TV, like the way like somebody that looks like me, how we're represented? How would you go about changing that? After going what you've said in terms of kind of, you know, you've got to be honest and pour yourself out and do it from the heart, etc. How would you do that without, or do you know what I mean? How to get into the right place by doing that, but then how do you break rules essentially?
You know, the problem is, first, you can't believe there are rules. You have to let go of that concept. And as strange as it is, you know, it's like every week or every year, it's like I've heard the buzz of like what is in, what is out. This year it's this, you know, the next thing you know, like a month later, it's, well, no, actually it's gone the complete opposite. If you're chasing that external reality, it is a hall of mirrors. It's a hall of mirrors in the sense that it will never be consistent. It will never make sense. You know, you'll think like, oh, this is exactly what people are looking for. And then it's like, no, actually we've changed direction and we're going in a different course. You're like, so you can't look externally for validation or for reinforcement of what you're aiming to create. If you have a story, again, it's like, you know, frankly speaking, as you know, as a Muslim now, you're actually in a better position than you were even 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, let's be honest, there's such a liberal now intentionality to sort of like show the Muslim point of view that's different than it was, you know, I would say even like, a few years before. It feels like we've gone away from that American Sniper Homeland perspective on reality, and we've shifted into a more liberal, tolerant, welcoming, open position. So, you know, I do, again, consciousness is constantly changing and morphing. So it's up to you to really just tap into what is inspiring. If you are feeling inspired, you're being called to do something. And ultimately, it's like, you don't know where the journey is going to take you. You write a script or you write whatever. I mean, you can write a pilot, you can write a play. And until that thing gets made, you don't know who's going to get eyes on it. You don't know like who's going to look at it. So you may write something that's, you know, really beautiful and poignant or powerful, and it can become your calling card for something else. Even if that one doesn't get made, it can become like, oh, he's a good writer, or he's got or she has a perspective. And you'll get people that will say, hey, I'll hire you to write this because I can see your ability to write, and I can understand a little bit of your perspective and the way that you've channeled something, you've given a point of view. So it's like, I need a Muslim point of view, so I'm going to hire you to write this TV show. Or, you know, I need a female perspective on whatever it is, you know, living in London, or, you know, living in New York, being an outsider, and, you know, being an outsider to New York. I mean, whatever it is like, if you bring your own personality into writing and the script gets, you know, is well written, and it's like, that's the first and most important thing, right? It's like, if the writing is at least quality and not sloppy, not full of, you know, just bad spelling, bad grammar, uninteresting dialogue, if at least it's like, it's coherent and cogent, people like will say, okay, here's a potential writer for me. And you just want people to get their eyes on it. So producers and whatnot, they can say, hey, you know, give it, you know, a network may call you. You don't know where this is going to go. Ultimately, the agent, the manager, like that reads it and says, hey, I'll rep you. That's actually just as important as saying I'm writing something as an indie that I want to go get made, because that indie project can ultimately take years and years. But in the meantime, you want to get you want your reputation to be that of someone that can write and brings a point of view that brings a quality of work, and then they can call upon you.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, cool. I think that's enough of me, and I've gone through most of the stuff that I had planned as well. So what we'll do is we'll open it up to the group, and we'll just kind of fire some questions. So I think Evan and Jacques might be a few questions. We'll start with Evan first. If you want to unmute yourself.
I had 3 questions. The first one, it's kind of a weird one, but what does your daily schedule look like in terms of art, in terms of like how you delve into your own creativity, if that energy is there, how you work around it if it's not there, like, sun up to sundown, what is your daily routine?
Thankfully, I'm breaking routines. I think it's important to get out of routines, especially the Capricorn, just to we get stuck in them. So for me, actually, the basis of my day, and thankfully this has been my practice for almost 20 years, has been meditation. So it's like get up, and it's like if I can, even before checking the phone. Sometimes I'm bad and I'll check phone and I'll respond to emails or whatnot first. But it's like the best thing to do is just clear your head, sit down, connect to breath, and do that practice, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. If you can do an hour, even better, but connecting to spirit, essentially, without the hindrance of all this external noise that really starts to influence our unconscious mind. We want to connect to the unconscious mind first and foremost. And that's to me like the basis of starting the day. And then from there, it's like, it depends obviously on what's going on. I always advise, if you can write, give yourself at least 3 to 4 hours. Don't try to force writing into like little sections unless you're just taking notes. Jotting notes, easy. You can write your notes, you can write your diary. But if you really are writing something, give yourself 3 to 4 hours. I mean, I wrote one script. I was doing a construction job. So it was like 7 a.m. I was at work, 3 p.m., 4 p.m. I was finished. So I'd be home. And the evening from like, 5 o'clock or whatever, 4:35, like I would just be like zoning in and give myself 3-4 hours to just write. And thankfully, like the construction job was mindless enough that I would literally just dream all day. Okay, get the next 10 pages visualized, or I'd have like the whole thing visualized, so that when I came home, it's like you can really just dive into what you visualized and put it on paper. But when I'm like, I would say for the most part, if you're writing a script, it's best if you can just give yourself a clear day and just give yourself like, from whatever time, 11 a.m., 10 a.m. Some people, they like to do early. Some people are night writers. Everyone's different, but I always just say, give yourself at least 3-4 hours to like really just sit and drop in and get into that hypnotic state. Cause that's really what it is. When you're self-hypnotizing, when you go into writing, I often use music as I oftentimes will play the same soundtrack or score so that it puts me into hypnosis. As soon as I hear it, it's almost just like a trigger. And then it's just like, okay, I'm in that world and no longer in this world. And then once you've hypnotized yourself and you can able more, basically based on practice, you get yourself into hypnosis faster, then you can just go into that state and plug away. And then, hopefully if you're really into the journey, it's like, you lose track of hours. You may want to come back. Sometimes you're like, oh, I have to go back and write after dinner or whatever. Like you want to get this next thought down. And then sometimes you're exhausted and you can't push yourself, because some days you're like, I know when I write like 6-hour days or 8-hour days, sometimes I'm just like, I'm done. The next day I need to take a break and get away from it, right? And go and into nature, or take a day off and just give myself time to rest, because it's exhausting. It's like playing chess for hours on end. You're in a sense, you're going into that level of analysis and, thinking and analyzing the potential moves, what's going to happen. Okay. Every choice that you make changes it changes every other character's, potential future. If you change the outline in any capacity, it's like it changes everything up to the end of the story and even before. So it's a lot of chess mental work. So don't give yourself like how do you say, don't pressure yourself when you're writing, but definitely give yourself enough time that you can drop in.
Cool. Yeah, you answered all the other questions I had, so
Yeah,
pretty much
absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Cool. We'll move on to Jacques. I think Jacques, you were a little bit late. Do you want to just briefly unmute yourself? Yeah, you're unmuted. Briefly introduce yourself and then just kind of, fire over the questions.
Cool. Hey, Sean. I'm Jacques. How are you? I'm a writer, actor, friend of Sahid's for a couple of years now, and I'm just really grateful to hear your advice and your life work also. I have a few questions, but I think there's something that I was looking at. I was looking at Singularity, Anarchali, and MetaHuman. All these three projects, they're all different in their own way, but I see some sort of connection, especially with Singularity and MetaHuman. There is like some sort of bridge. How would you describe your process in this discovery of consciousness that you're going and you're transmitting it through film?
Yeah, that's a big question. You ever notice sometimes you watch directors' films, and like if you get into like a certain director, you'll see hints of movies that they're like. You can take Spielberg, right? It's like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That's a dramatic portrayal of this, of the revelation of what that we're not alone, right? And it's almost it hints at basically what E.T. will then deliver. So it's like, in a sense, I don't know that Spielberg knew he was going to make E.T. at the point that he was writing Close Encounters. Maybe he did, because how do you say, like, there's something about this jigsaw puzzle of our reality that we can't quite get a hold of. I know, like in my dad's film, like we watched Born on the 4th of July, and the opening sequence, it's Kennedy talking on television. Kennedy's, speaking to the young Tom Cruise. I was in that scene as like a little kid. And it's like Kennedy is the inspiration for that generation. Now, at that time, my dad didn't know he was going to make a film about Kennedy, but it's like, it's in his psyche, it's in his interest, right? That's why he's obviously there. And so then when the opportunity comes, but maybe in the greater understanding of consciousness, the future is already speaking to us. If you really look at it from the way I see it, is like the future is already written. It's projecting into us. All you have to do actually is just relax and trust that we are moving exactly where we need to go, which is really the center of time, as opposed to moving away from something or moving towards it. So it's like, you have to trust that your interests are guiding you step by step. And so oftentimes, again, like you can really just, if you look at any filmmaker, especially like writer, director types, like you look at their work and you look at their early stuff and you're like, man, that theme comes up later in the next film, right? It's like that technique that he's working on. I think Nolan does the same kind of thing. It's like you see like a technique or something that he's hinting at in an early film, and then like the next movie, it's like it's elaborated further, and then further down the line, you're like, oh, he actually evolved that from this, what he was discovering and experimenting with in this movie. So that's the same way when it comes to the writing process. It's like you're just working on something. You have an idea, you have an interest. For me, it's Singularity. It's like I was really interested in the surveillance state, and like all this cameras and everything was like, okay, that was a 2000, which was still like, it was still sort of I knew that they were surveilling us with the early smartphones, but it wasn't like we understood it until Snowden like kind of explained it much for, like how elaborate it was. But I kind of like, it was kind of clear to me, like, okay, they got you got you on Google, they can track you, they're putting cameras all over the place in public. What's the next evolution of this? So it's like you start to carry that idea forth. But then at the same time, the Singularity as a concept was fascinating, because it's like that's the merging of man with machine, according to Kurzweil and these guys. Like, at what point can the human mind be replicated? And I always doubted that. I'm like, that's what MetaHuman, the documentary you mentioned, goes into. It's like at the level of the brain, at the level of like particles and things like this, yes, we can clone, we can copy, But when it comes to like mind and actually like where does consciousness originate, it doesn't seem to originate in the brain. It doesn't seem to originate anywhere. In fact, it's like, it's almost like the internet or something, like, you know, that we tap into, our computer or our mind taps into, that's all around us, surrounding us and viewing us. So it's like, and then everything that I then work on continuously, like even scripts that are unpublished or on, you know, not yet made, oftentimes are tied into similar themes. And that's why I say, like, you come back to things throughout your life. Like you start writing notes now or even when you're younger, you've been writing notes, writing stuff. And then you come back to it and you're like, oh, a lot of that was junk. Yeah. I mean, you got to get the shit out. Like Norman Mailer said, just get the shit out, put it down on paper. A lot of it's junk, but then you start to like pull out the diamonds and you're like, oh, okay, here we're finding the truffles here. And you start to take like, this is a great idea. This is a great line. This is a great concept. And you start pulling that. And you take it to the next thing you're working on, which is, you know, hopefully an evolution of what you previously wrote.
Cool. Yeah. That's no, I can see it. And in fact, I agree with that. I think writers, at least in my experience, I'm starting to write a theme, you know, and I'm in other stories, it has the same story. But I'm also really curious as to how many permutations of scripts do you go through until you settle on the finalized version?
It's never done till it's either in a, you know, on a screen somewhere, right? Someone's watching it. I mean, every director will tell you that that's more of a director's journey than a writer's journey. The writer's process, as a writer, I always say, look, you know, I deliver the draft that I feel reads well. There's a great quote, you know, perfect is the enemy of good. You don't want to go for perfect. If you go for perfect, you will spend your entire life toiling, and perfectionists oftentimes suffer this, you know, that they're always looking for perfect as opposed to good, which is like where it works, it feels right, it has like a balance, there's just something that feels, okay, I'm complete with this. And you turn it over and you get, again, like you get reflections on it, you get notes on it, you let it, you know, you let it be seen, felt, and then, you know, you take your time. I think that even before delivering it, I always say take a few days, if not a week, away from it and look at it fresh, you know, or if you can take longer, great, before giving it out. But, you know, there is a process of dialogue. Just as there's dialogue in the script, there's a dialogue with people who read it and interact with it to get their interpretation. And then as a writer, it's like you don't really ever get to say it's over. You know, I guess if you're like Sorkin or one of those guys, you can, but like most of the time it's like, no, you know, the director wants this change, that change, the studio wants this change, you know, any number of people have their comments and thoughts, and you're refining and hopefully not losing the essence of what you were going for at the beginning. And then again, like as a director, it's like, then it's even more questions because then you come up with director's cuts and then you say, wait a minute. I mean, my dad with Alexander is, I think, is on his 4th director's cut now. So it's like, there's some projects that you never want to let go. And so, yeah, it's an ongoing discourse, because art, let's be honest, it's like, it's difficult because you're releasing something at a moment in time, and yet it's impossible to know exactly what the zeitgeist is going to look like when you release that. So you're literally writing something now that may come out next year, may come out in 10 years. What the heck does the zeitgeist look like then? I don't care like how good a prophet or an astrologer you are, you're never going to know exactly what it's going to look like that day, that week, or whatever, that month. What, you know, who would have known, like, you know, the Black Lives Matter thing is very big right now in America, yeah. But, you know, a month ago, it was all about COVID. Now it's coming back to COVID. It's like, it's just, but again, like this is the mainstream perspective. Meanwhile, every person amongst the billions and billions of us are having our own personal experience of this moment. It's complicated. It's like, this is why art is so personal. And yet this is what I hate about the industry. It's like the mechanization of art, the mechanical reproduction of art, where they're trying to make everything sort of formulaic for the masses, as opposed to the idea of, hey, if you can even influence and touch a few thousand people, you know, that's already a great achievement.
Agreed. Saeed, if I could just do one more and then I'll be done.
Yeah, all right, go for it.
This is a quick one. how closely do you involve yourself with the editing process, and what role do you take in that process?
Editing is the final rewrite, actually. So as I don't know how many writers are let into the editing room, probably not many. That's really more the director's space. And even beyond the director, you know, again, who gets final cut, that's always a big debate. But yeah, editing is the final rewrite. I got a chance to work for a year in the editing room, doing W, which like I was one of the 4 editors on W, that film, and then The Untold History of the United States, which was a massive documentary that I spent 1 year. I think it was ultimately like a 5-year endeavor. So I didn't want to stick around for all that because I was focused on my own stuff. But the editing is so critical to the storytelling, right? And so I think even as a writer, if you can understand the editing a little bit, you know, you can actually start to put things into the script that will hopefully, the editors tend to stay with, you know, at the beginning at least, they do have the script with them. So there's a lot of respect for the script, you know, and if you can put things in the script to help guide even the editor, you know, not just director, but even the editor, that can hopefully help get your vision more clearly to the end. But trust me, I think a lot of writers have gone through this, where this is why they shift from writing to directing, or both, because you know, my dad amongst them, like he was, you know, reason he started directing is he hated the fact that as a writer, you know, who'd been a successful writer, he came from writing. And, you know, Scarface, even though I love the film and probably many people love the film, like he couldn't stand that he wasn't directing it. He wanted to his version. I don't know what his vision would have looked like, you know, would have been totally different. But that's the point, right? It's that people want to get their, you know, stamp on it. And some writers don't care. Some writers are more, you know, I leave it to the director. I leave it to that process, and I trust it. And other writers are saying, no, I've had enough. I want to have my stamp. I'm going to direct it. And hopefully, you know, they'll let me.
Right. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques. And then I think, Hannah, you had a question, didn't you? Go ahead.
Hi. So I apologize because this might come out a little convoluted. I tried to write it out, but I figured it'd be better to improvise. My question is a bit more specific. So a bit of context to my question is I grew up as a bit of a closet Iranian, and by what I mean by that is not that I wasn't proud of being Iranian, but the only place where I was, you know, really free to express and enjoy my culture was kind of within the confines of my home and my family. And then later on in my life, when I was old enough, I kind of navigated the Middle East, you know, as a light-skinned Shia, like I kind of fit into all these different boxes, and like a Westerner, you know, in comparison to other, you know, Middle Easterners who grew up locally. So I guess I've wrestled a lot with credibility in my life, a lot of like guilt of feeling like, can I even write about my culture? Can I write about the Middle East? Can I write about this narrative? Do I have the right to claim it? But actually it inspires a lot of my like purpose in my art and my writing. So I guess I was curious about your travels to the Middle East, and even Iran, if you want to speak on that. And has it inspired any of your writing? And further, and maybe second to that, did you find it hard to bring it back with you?
So that's an interesting story. Well, to answer your question, if you're questioning yourself, you already know the answer, and that is you are supposed to do something, and that's why you're asking yourself that question. And don't hesitate or doubt the authenticity or the sense that you don't have the right or any of that, which is just that's a belief. That's not essential to who you are and what you are here to do. So there is something to be said for what you have to offer based on your perspective. As far as Persia, you're right. By the way, just say Persia. That's what they always say. It's nicer, right? Everyone likes Persia. It sounds so gentle. Iran is so scary. Who is it? like the comedian, he made that joke, Reza, what's his name? You know what I'm talking
I
about.
don't know.
Omid Jalili, like a famous Iranian comedian.
What's his name? Reza
Oh, is it Omi Jalili?
Hey, man, I'm blanking on who it was. My ex-girlfriend was Persian American, and so we would watch this kind of stuff. And she, by the way, in America, it's obviously a little bit different, but difficult, of course, anywhere, I'm sure, when it comes to politics. Even though she hated the regime, and so yes, I mean, there's a lot to be said, and there's a lot of emotion, energy that you can draw upon from your experience. I recommend it. For me, my experience was funny because what drew me to Iran was Rumi. I was really interested in doing something on Rumi. We're still actually developing it in a different sense than before. But when I got there, I ended up, yes, I mean, I loved the culture, and I certainly, we traveled. I was also very interested by the jinns, by the way, the so-called, the jinns, like genies for Western culture, but essentially, as you know, they're considered like demonic entities or, paranormal spirits. And I'm actually going to incorporate that into this documentary I'm releasing later this year called Secret Stone. And we're going to get into some of my conversations in Iran with one of the jinn seers who explains what they're about. So it's kind of cool. But I actually ended up getting interested in the script. So we ended up writing well, I'll put it like this. There's a great story we found in Iran about the true war America has been waging against the Iranian regime there, using these sort of terror groups on the periphery. And so we decided this is a great concept because, the war on terror is so ugly. It's so dirty. It's not the way Americans understand it. Like, Al-Qaeda, it's like some, G.I. Joe boogeyman or something, and the Americans are out there fighting them. It's just like, it's so much more intricate, as we all know, in terms of the drug traffic is involved, human trafficking, the money laundering that goes on, the different governments that are all at some level profiting from this trade. And so they allow these things to continue and to operate and have different interests. So we found this amazing story and ended up developing a script that was really, really interesting. I wanted to make it and ended up having interest from an American investor into this, and he was going to put up half the money, and then the Iranians balked. And that was like a weird situation where after like all this time developing it, like the Iranians were the ones that backed out, and it just kind of fell apart. And so it was a very disappointing experience for me. But again, I mean, not untypical when you're developing projects. Most of the time it just, it's very difficult to get that perfect storm of all the elements, the financing, the talent. Yeah, I mean, this obviously distribution, all these things coming together. It's a lot of energy and magic in a sense. Every movie is magic that it actually gets completed and released. So in this case, it didn't happen, but we had a great time investigating and coming up with actually a pretty good script at the end of it. Who knows? Maybe one day it'll get made.
Amazing.
I don't know if that answers your question, Hannah.
No, it does. I anything speaking on your experience of it is great. Thank you.
Yes, it continued because I dated the Persian lady for 3 and a half years. So Iran stayed in my life for about, I don't know, 3-4 years.
Amazing. I think Michael's got a question next. Michael, do you want to unmute and go for it?
Yeah, Hannah, were you done with your questions? All good? Yeah, thanks, Sean, so much. First off, just thank you for like your perspective on what it is to create, because I definitely feel that the pressures sometime of just creating something that ticks the boxes. And I love what you explain about, how art is evolutionary and it's always growing and it's always changing. And that's the whole point of it. It's a journey, it's a discovery. So in asking these questions, I do understand and fully just accept if the answer is, well, you can't really answer that question because the question answers itself, and it's sort of, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, in a sense. It's, if it is always evolving, then it should be, I guess, whatever happens in the moment. But whatever you can give me on these, please do. You're talking about the analysis, right? The self-analysis and that feeding a lot of the work. How crucial would you say it is for that self-analysis to feed the writing, or would you say it's more important, or rather would you find it more beneficial to work the other way around, free write and then refine it down to the analysis? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, when you say self-analysis, how do you see it? How do you view that in relationship to the writing?
I guess so analysis in general, in terms of what your writing is speaking about. So whether that is like what you said, write what you know, and that could literally be something, even if it's not within your immediate sort of circle. You're writing about something. It's an in-depth discovery into yourself. So I think, so what I mean by analysis is, that look at, okay, I'm writing this as a story. This person's going to the store and they're buying this thing. But what I'm actually saying with that is this person is struggling to make decisions, or this person is struggling to. So the analysis is okay. When struggling to make a decision, we trip up. We're not able to get to this thing. Would you say it comes a lot of the time from a free-flowing, let it out, and then look into the psyche of, okay, why did I write that? Or would you say it comes from the other way of, okay, this is what I want to write about, so this is how I should do it, and then you start writing,
Yeah, it's interesting. Because the creative, as we know, the creative process, art is so left brain, right brain merging, the two hemispheres merging, that it's very difficult to know, sometimes which way to go, right? What comes first. You have to, it has to be organic, I guess you could say. It has to be organic, because you may just start writing stuff, right? And then at the end of it, go back and say, well, it's a mess. I need to like have index cards to know what each scene, to separate the scenes and kind of give a certain intentionality, right, of where what's happening in each scene. This is part of the reason why I said in the beginning, like, outlining is important, I think, before diving into the detail. Like, so you have a sense of the terrain. It's like mapping, right? You outline, you give yourself, okay, where am I moving? And then oftentimes I find that when you plant the seed in your unconscious, the conscious mind finds triggers, it manifests it. So it's like, let's say you've written something and you're like, well, I need to show that this character is indecisive. You become consciously aware of something you need to create. You plant that seed, let it just grow. And thoughts may come to you, may happen overnight. Sometimes people dream stuff. I mean, I know there's that great story about a lot of people say, like, they just sleep on their book that they want to like read in their study class. If they're studying a book for a class, they'll put it under their pillow, and like they'll get the information sort of through gestation and through I don't know, gestalt, or what you'd say, comes to them. Oftentimes, I think Einstein and others have talked about this. Like, they'll dream the answers they're looking for if they let their mind rest, because they go into the unconscious and then they find the answer they're looking for. So it's like, once you become aware, like, okay, I need to have something, I need to achieve something that looks something like this, or you start to give a directionality and just plant the seed, you'll be surprised at how organically it'll start to come out. And maybe it'll happen in your own life. You'll actually plant the seed, and all of a sudden it happens in relationship with someone around you, or going to the store yourself, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, that was a moment, I can draw upon it, right? You write it down, you note it. So the ammunition is all around us. It's like our universe is happening to us, for us, through us. It's not just on that page. It literally, you're living it. You're living the creative process. You're living your hero's quest. That's why I say the writing is like, at one goal is getting it made, but the deeper nature of it is actually self-transformation. As again, self-analysis is one aspect of it, but you can't, it's almost, it's like that Zeno paradox, right? Where it's like, you cannot, if you freeze the frame of the arrow at every moment, it will never reach its destination, right? It's like, it's like an infinite number of moments between the releasing of the arrow when you're launching a bow and like you release the arrow. It's like, there's an infinite number of moments between releasing the arrow and actually arriving at that target, if you want to freeze it and analyze it. So you release the arrow, you let it fly. Okay, that didn't hit the mark. Now I can analyze, maybe I was a little bit off in my form, maybe this was a little bit off. But if you're trying to, I'm saying like, you can't hold yourself up by thinking about it. It's in the process, it's in the moment of just doing something, letting it fly, and then seeing the result that you can start to analyze.
So do you feel like you can ruin a script with over analysis and over trying to, okay, I really want to, you know, make this thing in every line that someone says, say particular hidden messages, etc. Can you ruin a script by going overboard, or is it always worth trying to keep pushing for that?
I don't know. I don't know if you can ruin a script by having that level of intentionality. I think that most people will never get it. But that doesn't matter, because what you bring is the level of detail and attention that makes it, you know, I think it makes it more profound, right? Look, I mean, there's plenty of movies, I'm sure, like, you know, from like Aronofsky and others, you know, who are very successful filmmakers who have planted stuff that most audiences have never been able to pick up and never will, right? But it's like, it's okay, because that was, you know, that was part of his mysticism, right? I mean, the Coen brothers, I'm sure the same. Like, a lot of people have success calling upon mystical, like, details and mystical sort of moments that don't quite make sense to the rational mind. But in their analysis, they understand exactly what they're doing. All you have to remember is that you're analyzing it from a perspective that most people will never have, because most people will watch this once at most. You are experiencing this every moment, thousands and thousands and thousands of times. You know, it's the same problem that like any director has when they're watching their stuff. It's like, you just get tired of it. It's like you're too close to it. So, you know, you've got all this analysis and detail, and then you release it and people are like, yeah, but I don't care. Like, you've lost the interest for me. So I say, like, try to focus most of your energy and attention into the feeling of the story, the sort of the movement. Is it moving? Is it carrying me? Is it interesting, you know, anyone beside myself? And then, yeah, if you want to plug away at like analyzing, and, you know, you may end up just wanting to like write your own critique of the thing. It's like, you know, the film analysis is a fun thing, right? But most people aren't going to watch this that many times, you know, or unless it's just like really exciting and really great. And then they're just like coming back over and over, in which case they're going to pick up on all those nuggets.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, perfect. And I guess that leads me on to my final question I wanted to ask. For you personally, what's most important when it comes to a script? Because, you know, a lot of people will say different things. You know, some people say without a relationship, it doesn't exist. Without a story, without a message, you know, there's no point writing the script. For you, what would you say is that crucial thing that a script sort of has to have, if any, you know?
You know, it's like, what is it that makes a great film? You know, Nicholson, I think, said it was like 5 great scenes and no bad ones. That's one interpretation of what makes a great film. I mean, you know, why is it that, you know, people love the Goonies? I mean, it's like, why do people love, you know, certain shows? It's like, what, you know, what is it about them that it's like they say the je ne sais quoi? But, you know, what you find when you write scripts is that no matter what, like, you're working in a world where everyone is a critic and everyone is looking for what's not there. So the script could be like a good script, you know, and it's like, yeah, but it doesn't have enough of this component. It doesn't have enough of that component. The character doesn't do this enough. It's like, we live in a world where, you know, you literally just, you know, you can show the Sistine Chapel and they'd be like, yeah, but where's the donkey in this picture? I mean, it's like it's always looking for what's missing from the image as opposed to what's there. That's just, unfortunately, a lot of the negative the negative feedback that people get also stimulates that criticism in a sense. Like there's just so much angst and putting things under a microscope as opposed to just feeling it and experiencing it and saying like, I don't know, it's impossible to know exactly what it is that like that's going to make that script so good, except that like at the end of it, is it satisfying? That's already what matters. And then, you know, refining it, everyone's going to refine something differently. And again, you know, by the end of it, a director or the studio can screw it up completely. There's so many different ways to go. The actors, you know, may not perform it properly. I mean, there's so many things that can go wrong, but at least if the blueprint is working, that's what I said before, like perfect is the enemy of good. Just go for good. If it's working, if it's balanced, if it has some emotional release. Some people say like if it makes you laugh, it makes you cry, that's a hit right there. If you don't have that, you know, if you're not going for laughs and tears, you know, if you have something that's like whatever genre it is or whatever like your model is, you obviously, it's along the way, I think it's important to watch films in that genre, in that style, even though you don't want to necessarily become like completely referential and just imitate, but like it's important to understand what works and what doesn't work for you in watching them. But again, it's like each script, it's like it has to have its own thing. Sometimes it's the character. The character is just like you love that character. Sometimes you love the relationship and the romance. Sometimes you love the action, right? We don't go to see Fast and the Furious for, I guess, a little bit for the, you know, romance, but like most of the time you're seeing it for what? For the action. So you have to know what you're wielding here and work with that.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's been one of the things with me a lot, is having that confidence to say, you know, let it free flow, let it be organic, because at the end of the day, what works isn't always defined, and it's always changing. So thank you so much. That helps a lot.
Cool.
Amazing. And should we go to Elliot next? Elliot, do you wanna? You're on mute, Elliot.
Yes. Thank you very much for your time, Sean, and obviously Zaid for arranging this. I don't really have so much of a question. It's more, I hunger learning and seeking inspiration. So I'm constantly immersing myself in either going to events where I can hear people I admire or respect their work, so I can sponge and, I guess, seek my own trigger for inspiration. So I just really wanted to say that everything you've said, I feel I'm on the exact frequency, and I feel like I'm talking the exact language so I can really understand it. So now I've seen from you sharing your yourself, I guess, I've understood now it's maybe not about seeking the inspiration at this stage, it's more about surrendering. And you spoke about the meditation, and I was also interested because you mentioned your star sign a few times, and my mum's a big influence on me in this area. It's called Human Design.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've heard of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I figured you probably would, just because we're on that. I feel that resonance. So yeah, that's all I really have to say. Thank you so much for allowing me to see my own surrender. Of
course. No, and Human Design is interesting insofar as for generators, I'm a generator, so-called,
likewise,
right?
Yeah.
So we're like the worker bees. We tend to like, you know, we just work ourselves to death, I guess. But they say that you should follow your bodies. You know, that's an important thing in life. We don't listen to our body, right? Yeah. So it's like you follow your body's impulse. If something excites you, you feel it in your body. If something is heavy, you're like, you know, you feel like a sigh, like, okay, maybe you shouldn't be working on that because it's depressing you. Whereas that which elates you and brings you joy, keeps your, you know, you feel more energized by it. That's, you know, you got to listen to that. Yeah. And I mean, I've been working on scripts since 2012, and literally everything you've said, I've literally only ever gone into my world, put, like you said, that trigger track, and they become tedious at points because I'm writing a drama that has so much emotion that I'm putting into it from fragments of my life story that are subconscious or conscious.
and that I'm having to listen to all this acoustic, pain music. So it was quite enjoyable writing a comedy because I could whack the hip hop on and really get going. But yeah, that's all I really have to say. Thank you so much for sharing that.
That's a pleasure.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Elliot. And then if we move on to, I think, Chris and then Madison. So Chris, unmute. Unmuted. Perfect. Go for it, Chris.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Okay. It's going to be really fast. You mentioned something about making films for the masses, and that if you make an indie film and 1,000 people get to see it, you'd be happy. But if 1,000 people get to see that film, there's no way you'd be making a profit on that film. And I think, shouldn't people be striving to find a balance between the business side and the artistic side? And I always find it so rare to find a good movie that really generates money, that really generates a profit and is a profitable business-wise. Is it that it's just rare to find someone that can find the balance, or is it that you have to sacrifice your artistic, whatever you want to do in the artistic side? Can you make something for the masses that's also intellectually stimulating? Is my question. I know it's been done before, but is it just that it's really hard and unusual, or maybe they're just lucky that they click on something with the masses that just they connect to? Darren Aronofsky might be a good example for that.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't say I'd be happy with 1,000 people seeing a movie. I meant if you can influence and touch thousands of people, that's already success. Because for a film to reach thousands of people, yes, that would be, as you said, it would not really work. But if you understand what you're doing in the beginning, which is to say, you can do a short film, you could do something that costs, $1,000. You could do, I know a guy who just did like a little. He just reminds me because he talked to me. We were talking to him recently about it. He did one of those Snapchat kind of movies, like for 2 minutes, that he just did on Snapchat or something, and he got like hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube. So the point is that you can do things creatively that are influencing, that are touching people, that can have a story. It doesn't have to take the old model, the model of the 2-hour film. Really, it's 1.5 to 2 hour film. That model was unique to cinema. As we know, theater is similar. Theater tends to be, about 2 hours. Musicals about the same. Opera is a little bit longer. So, I think that we now know from Quibi, for example, like they're looking for short content. They're looking for 10-minute intervals, and they're breaking their content up along those lines. So the nature of storytelling is shifting. There's so many different ways of doing it, right? You can do an audible book. You can do obviously books, but you can do you could do like a visual, VR experience. I mean, there's so many different ways of getting a message across, getting a journey, going back to even, the ancient shamanic journeys, ayahuasca journeys. Like there's so many different ways of telling the story that when you talk about like, what does it mean to have a commercially successful film that's also fulfilling intellectually? That's that's interesting. There's times are the problem. Time shifting, zeitgeist shifting, business models shifting. So in the 70s and 80s, you had the birth of what was like the independent studio system, right? Basically, the studios had controlled cinema since the 20s and 30s, and actually done a pretty good job if you think about it. I think the studio model was very good because it actually gave writers a place to write and to be on payroll, and it gave actors payroll, and it gave directors payroll, and they didn't spoil the actors and pay them millions and millions of dollars, but it was like everyone was enjoying the success of the studio. And that system died, and so you ended up with the independent system, which was where you got the Billy Friedkins and the Scorseses and Spielbergs and De Palmas and my father and all these people coming out of that, which was really about it was a mixture of experimentation, but people that understood storytelling, right? Because they understood the studio model of telling stories. They were intellectual, they were creative, they were making movies that were like Jaws was like the first blockbuster, right? That was considered a blockbuster success, although Gone with the Wind and others had been such, but like Jaws blew them all away. And it became this idea of a summer blockbuster, which was around, a thrilling concept, a monster movie. And from there, the studio model became like, okay, you could do your dramas and and you could also do your blockbuster movies. But by the late 90s, 2000, it went insane. The CGI effects took over. You saw basically more and more the focus and emphasis became on the blockbuster, summer blockbusters, so that every weekend it was like another summer blockbuster was coming out. By the end of the 2000s, you basically had the studios basically putting no money into dramas, which is where we are now. Like very little, if any money into dramas, maybe picking it up on the back end. But so, the Aronofskys and others, they had succeeded by working the indie model, which is where I think a lot of young writers and directors are looking, which is, okay, I make a movie like Pi, you did Pi for whatever it was, 100,000 or something. And like you do your movie for a very small amount of money, tell your story. Even Nolan did that. Following, his first one, I think was called Following. It's like you just do it for minimal amount and then you get successful. The problem at the indie level, Sundance, Toronto. Now we're at the place where there's 500,000 submissions to the festivals every year. So you've seen this explosion of talent, right? Of young aspiring actors and writers and directors who all want to be in those positions. It's shifting, right? It's again, like it's not necessarily going to work that way. You can't look to that old model anymore. So, there's no way I can tell you what your path is. You have to chart your path. You have to create, you have to write, you have to tell your stories, you have to work at it. But the most important thing I think is that people think in Hollywood, it's like there's this whole thing like, who do you know? It's who you know that matters. No, it's not who you know, it's who backs you.
Right.
Work, if you do the work, you connect, you get people read your stuff, you end up with people that like it. And you ultimately, as a writer, more than anything, you want to make relationships with not only managers and agents, but producers, right? So it's like the producer that's going to say, this is a great script, right. I have a relationship with this director or whatever, like you start to put things together with those right teams, right? So it's a teamwork. It's a producer. It could be an actor. It could be any number of people that like start to team together, and that energy collectively starts to build the project into existence. So, who knows whether or not the, how do you say, the next intellectual thing, that's ultimately up to, you have to create it. If you put yourself into a position of having, made some success at different levels, I'm sure you'll get the opportunity to then tell that story that you want at a little bit bigger budget that can then be seen by, the masses. But nowadays you just never know. I mean, these influencers are getting more views, like I said, than most movie stars. I mean, who the heck are they? I don't even know them. I'm like in my 30s and I feel old. I'm like, who the heck are these little people that like every 13, 14, 15-year-old kid is watching, and they're getting like 10, 20 million, fans and Insta followers and Periscope and TikToks and other things. I mean, to have influence nowadays doesn't really mean much. To sustain the mind is actually the most challenging thing, I think, in this instant culture that we live in.
That's very true. Thank you, Sean.
So I don't know. I don't know if that helps, but I think, the main point is just networking with people of a similar mindset and energy.
Yeah.
That's what matters.
I like what you said about the producer. It's sort of everything has to sort of align together, because the producer takes the risk, monetary risk, for your artistic, because they believe in whatever you have to offer. But I think about, like, imagine a restaurant that has a lot of fluff, but the food is not good, versus a restaurant that looks shitty, but the food is actually amazing. It can also be that it looks nice and it also is good. You know, like it doesn't have to be one or the other. I'm thinking about musical bands, like Red Hot Chili Peppers, for example. They're a band that everybody likes, but they're also not like a generic band. They have a very sort of intellectually or artistically they're liked as well.
Right.
So
yeah, you just want to keep it's like you're building a business. That's the way you have to see it. Like the same way that, like, okay, go into the restaurant business, and no one's saying you're first you're going to start off by owning your own restaurant or that it's going to be a success, but you work at it, right? You work at your cuisine and your craft of cooking and knowing how to do it the same way. It's like writing is the same principle. Like you get good as a writer at your craft, people then say, okay, you know, I want to invest with you, or I want to work with you, and you start to build it out.
Yeah. But what I mean is, like, a lot of actors have this idea, like, oh, I'm gonna do one blockbuster movie and make money, and then make my own artistic things, and it doesn't have to be that way. You know, it can be a blockbuster movie that's also great. You know, I know it has to be harder, but you know, yeah.
Well, I don't know what actor, you know, that just says I'm going to be in a blockbuster, star in a blockbuster movie. I mean, good luck. Good luck. I mean, it's just like, you know, the point is, you know, we're shifting out of that. I think that whole notion of stardom is shifting away anyway. That's why you have so many actors that are just, you know, on television shows, and it's like, they, you know, you never heard of them or whatever. Like, they're starting up, you know, they do well on the show, and it's like, that's acting, you know, the whole concept of the blockbuster. You know, we'll see where that industry goes. Yeah. We'll see where that industry goes. But, you know, the funny thing is, you'll find when it comes to like a lot of this stuff, the foreign sales markets and whatnot, that like people pay to see, you know, Thor. People pay to see Captain America. They don't necessarily are going to go to the theater because Chris Evans or what's his name, Chris Hemsworth or Chris Pine is in the movie. It's like, that's kind of, so that whole model, I think, is shifting away from the idea of just like paying for stars and all that. It's about collaborating with people. That, this is what I say, the future economy to me, it's simple. It's human to human. When humans come together, as each one of us is creative and talented in our own capacity, we have something to offer the world. When we come together, then I think the money and everything will flow from the idea of that collaboration, as opposed to the old model, which was basically a form of prostitution, which was like saying, you know, like, let me hawk tickets and hawk stuff based on, you know, the idea of your value, as opposed to like you as a sovereign saying, I know what I can do and what I can offer, and I want to work with you because, you know, I know what you can offer, and we come together in collaboration. That's where I think the future of the whole world can move, and especially entertainment.
I agree. Thank you, Sean.
Of course.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Chris. And then I think we have a question from Madison next.
Hi.
Madison.
Yeah, so my question is basically, when you're writing a script, and if there's like characters that you've decided are representative of like certain experiences, how do you avoid like tokenizing or like,
well, like, yeah, go ahead.
Base anything off of like personalities, like what's your process of all of that?
I lost the last part. You were saying about the personalities. It broke up.
Oh yeah, how much do you base off of like people that you know, or like stories that you're finding?
You know, well, by tokenizing, tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking, because there's obviously like, yes, there's the concern of stereotyping, but what do you mean by, like, how do you see it tokenizing?
I guess I was wondering, so if you're like putting together like, okay, so this person's going to be representative of this, and this person, like, how do you add variety and like authenticity of like somebody's experience when it is separate from you? Like you were talking about, write what you know, and like you can know Malcolm X, but like to what degree do you feel that you can write about that, and like how often do you like pull in other people that you know and like their experiences and ask them, like, what's your process of writing something that is so outside of you?
Right. This kind of question is hard without getting into specifics, I guess you'd say. I mean, there have been whole movies made about the sensitivity of people to being portrayed in other people's work, right? Whether it's a book or a movie. And I've never had to deal with with quite that. I mean, I think that you have to be honest if you are portraying someone specifically, that, you know, it's good to have that conversation or to share the work with them and get their thoughts. So to go back for a second, when it comes to like tokenism or whatnot, it's interesting how every character, when it comes to film and even TV to an extent, I suppose, but every character in a film becomes the main character on the moment that they're on screen. And this is what they teach you, I think, in acting as well, because it's like, you have to show up and you're literally going to be on screen. You have this moment of the audience's eyes are on you. You're conveying information, or you're there for a reason to serve the plot, right? To serve the plot, to serve the relationships of the characters, to serve the dynamics taking place. So you are the main character of that moment. Doesn't matter how small the role is. If you're getting featured on a screen, it's like you're getting dialogue on a movie. That's important for the movies. Obviously, it's needed for the movie to continue. So to me, it's like there's no token role unless it's scripted in a stereotypical way. But if it's scripted in a stereotypical way, it should either be meant for comedy, satire, in a sense, like you're poking fun at, you know, perhaps this stereotype, or, you know, if you're playing in a certain genre like horror, right, you could be playing with, like, you know, how the blonde female is portrayed or something. Like there can be like a sense of humor and reference. But to be stereotypical and something that's serious, yeah, you definitely want to work against that, which is to say, give the dialogue that hopefully best serves the situation, the reality of the situation. Ultimately, I mean, you as the writer, but ultimately in collaboration with those, you know, who work with you, will know how deep you want to take each character, each, you know, again, like, you know, someone shows up on screen, unless they're like, you know, how do you say, you don't want to give that person too much dialogue in just one scene, unless, you know, they're coming back, or unless they're serving something deeper, right, to the story, in which case, you know, how can you make that character alive? How can you bring an experience for that character to, you know, to feel and to be, you know, to be part of this journey. So that's like token side of it. And then as far as like depicting others that you know in real life, I mean, I would say every writer, I'm sure, draws upon real dialogue, real situations. You know, certainly when I'm in the writing mode, I'm like throwing out dialogue, just trying things, just seeing how people respond. It's like a very experimental phase, right? You're like concocting something in a lab. And, you know, people know also, like you know, they know when you're writing that you're the kind of person that's absorbing a lot, you know, taking a lot of stuff. And if you don't want to, you know, take too much just from your own life, again, draw upon books, articles, read, study. It's not like it's, I mean, Oscar Wilde talked about that, like the great artists steal, right? You know, like these, what is it? Good artists just everybody borrows, like the great artists steal or something. The genius steals, because we're always drawing upon the world around us. That's, you know, that's how we are as humans. Our dialogue doesn't, you know, a lot of it comes from what we heard as kids, from our parents, from people we saw on television, and then we come back and we give it back to the world through our self-expression. So that's not to say that you have to be limited by that either. You can, you know, if it feels if it feels like tokenism, if it feels one-dimensional, superficial, then yes, deepen into it. You know, go, you know, just think of a different way of saying it. Think of a different way of portraying it. You have that ability to reimagine the way things are.
Awesome. Yeah.
I just wanted to say on that, there's nothing I love more in a movie where I think I've got a character pinned. I'm like, oh, this person's like brainless, you know, they're just they're not thinking, and then they come out with the most thoughtful line of the whole movie, and it's like, it's the best thing, you know, when you think you got someone pinned like that and then they just throw you completely off course with something, because it's true, you know. Sometimes some of the people who you think you'd never get a wise comment from say something that's so simple, so pure, and you're like, that's gold. That's pure wisdom right there. And they didn't even mean to do it. They weren't even trying to do it. And I love it when that happens in a script or a movie,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. You want a surprise, you know, this is why I hate about genre stuff. It's like, I like when you don't end up, I mean, anyone knows this, like you don't want to bore the audience with knowing where this is going from the beginning. You want to be able to keep the constantly keep the person who's watching this on their feet, or like, you know, just one step behind. You don't want to leave them in your dust. You don't want to leave them 10 steps behind or around the corner. And they're like, I have no idea where you are at this point, but you want to be just a little bit ahead of the audience. That's the way to play it. So at the point that, okay, this is predictable, that's when you throw in the curveball.
But I guess what's funny about that is that so many, you know, us as a cultural audience, like what we've put our money towards, and over decades, what also made Hollywood famous in a lot of ways was that kind of predictable ending. And like people needing that, like you needed that on a Friday night, you needed that on a Saturday night or Sunday night, because I guess that was also our own, you know, subconscious, you know, defense mechanism to our daily lives of uncertainty and just navigating all of the kind of the trials and hardships. So I find it's really interesting because good art is unpredictable. Good art is unwritten and kind of uncharted territory. But at the same time, you know, there's the flip side of that, which is that everyone needs that kind of you know, that ending, that scenario. We're very thrown, actually, like emotionally we're very unsettled when we don't get that ending sometimes, because it's like, okay, well, you know, it's like we're hopeless if we don't. At times I'm not defending it, I think it's interesting.
Well, there's two ways. I mean, if you go back and think like, okay, the classical understanding of drama was there's two ways to end. One is the comedy, which is the happy ending, and one is the tragedy, which is supposedly tragic, but actually at the deeper level is a form of self-realization, or a form of deepening our understanding of our culture, let's say a flaw in our society, our culture, and ourselves, right? Those are the idea. Ultimately was that there's something that can be taken from this that gives us a deeper meaning of life. So at the superficial level, the Hollywood ending is, and everyone lives happily ever after. That's the Disney-fied version of fairy tales. As we know, many fairy tales, they didn't end that way. Many fairy tales were gruesome and much more complicated. But the superficial layer is not where you have to look. As the writer, you think, what is the deeper message that I'm putting here? Because, hey, let's be honest, we all want to feel good at the end of the story. It's not a bad thing to want to feel good at the end of it, if you go through a journey that can transform and transmute and basically, again, alchemize from the raw to a more refined gold. Amazing. If the story demands, if the natural ending of the story is such that it needs a tragedy, it needs some level of, you know, Titanic, right? Tears. we have to purge ourselves with tears. That's okay too. I mean, that's nothing. Titanic is one of the most successful films of all, and right, and that was you could say tragic. I don't know if it's necessarily a tragic from the classical perspective, because I don't know that Kate Winslet had a revelation, right, about her society and what she came from, that class. So there is something to be said for, even when you cry, you can still feel satisfied. You can still feel like that was the right ending. Personally, I think that the worst endings are the ones that are like, they feel nihilistic, bleak, sort of like, and there's something to be said for that too. I mean, when depending on what genre and what kind of film you're making, there are important stories that can end on a bleak note, just to remind us, you know, that there are things that are flawed and out of control in our world. but yeah, I think the point is finding the right ending. It's such an interesting journey in writing. And sometimes I know I've changed endings from initially going from like the hopeless, sorrowful, realizing, well, no, I think love is actually a greater inspiration and a greater, I should emphasize love more, because that's really what we're all searching for in life. And that is what the happy ending is ultimately about. It's about the aspiration for happiness, right? The reason that we all pursue happiness and we all pursue love in our life. Um, so yeah, finding the right ending. That's like, it's its own story in a sense. The entire movie, you could say, is actually the journey to find the right ending.
Thank you.
Amazing. Renata, I think you had a question, didn't you?
Hi, I'm sorry I came in late. I'm Renata. I'm studying acting right now. I'm also a musician, so the only thing that I've written is songs, but I love storytelling in general. But I guess my question is not that specific. First of all, thank you so much for everything you've shared. It's so amazing. I'm just like absorbing and absorbing, just listening to everything that everyone's saying is gold. But I guess I just want to ask, sometimes, I mean, we live in this like hyper stimulated society, right? So I feel like we have like all these places to take from all the time, and we're constantly absorbing things from everyone and everything around us. So I guess that I just have sometimes trouble like narrowing that vastness that comes from, I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but it's just like sometimes it's so much that we can see and we can experience, and I mean, I don't know anything at all, but sometimes I just have an idea and then I have another one and another one, but I just don't know how to narrow down and just work on one, or just like gas all that back out.
Well, you're not alone. In fact, the hardest thing, wow, when I like some of the early stuff that I wrote came from that place of wanting to like, like I was like diving into certain conspiracy stuff, for example, right? But like, so I would get into like the rabbit hole of like the Illuminati has come up a lot recently in the post 2012 years. I was interested in this stuff back in like the 2000s, before YouTube and all that stuff made it accessible and popular. So I would just be reading and reading and reading. And then when you're creating something original, especially, it's difficult because it's like you don't have a blueprint. You don't have a true story that at least can give you some level. And true stories are not necessarily easier to write than a fiction, but it's like at least there's some blueprint. So for me, I was like, I would take all these different ideas, and then like sometimes it would just get dialogue would become very preachy, and then it was becoming like this is like a lot of the stuff people send me is like the worst, where they just spend monologue after monologue and they're just trying to like tell you everything and tell you everything and tell you what's going to happen and tell you what's, you need to know this and you need to know that, and don't forget about this. It's like, as opposed to experiencing the journey. So it's normal though when you're learning something. It's like the difference between a teacher and a student. When you're studying something, you're taking everything in and you're giving back what you think is important, but you're still studying it. So you're still like at that place where you don't really know yet fully how to synthesize it. So you're still like, okay, by writing it, you're teaching yourself in the process so that you have it ingrained inside of you. By the end, if you keep absorbing and practicing, like just writing, whatever, you just put it out there. By the end of it, it takes time. It can take years, but you will refine yourself to the place where it's second nature. And so you're not studying it anymore. So you already know it. And then you can already filter so that you can turn it from what was before like an overt statement of fact into a metaphor. And that's really where art's supposed to go, right? So it's like you're moving more from, it's like, in Jesus's teachings, it's like when he's moving into like telling you the parables of the seeds and the parables of the mustard seed. It's like, I'm telling you a story now. I'm not telling you, you're the chosen, you're this, you're going to go there. You're not telling them anymore. You're giving them a story, and those that can understand the story are now following, and they can see, as you were saying before, Michael, like they can see then the analysis, can understand, oh, the parable of the mustard seed is, this person represents that, this seed represents this. So that's where art's supposed to go. Art's to take all that wisdom and knowledge and information. That's why it takes time. That's why it's very rare to have like a successful, you know, writer, director, or whatever, like at a young age, because you're still in that phase of learning yourself and you're still exploring. And then when you can take those ideas and turn it into a metaphor, into a story that's just seamless, that just gives the intention and gets the idea across without having to like tell everyone every step of the way what's happening, that's when you've really synthesized the knowledge. So right now it's like the absorption process is the first phase. That's where you just like, you're a sponge, you're taking it in, writing it down. Hey, you may end up with some great dialogue out of it, you may end up with some great ideas out of it, but until it's like it's really yours and you've owned it, you can't necessarily tell that whole story. Make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson say that the first thing you need to know is that you don't know anything. And I feel like what you're saying about the student teacher thing is so important, because if you are just lecturing people, that's not art. That's reading a newspaper. That's just the news. It's just telling people fact upon fact upon fact, and on based on things that, again, we don't really know to be true, or you know, they're loosely based off of facts, which is a old thing to say if you have a fact. But the whole learning, like you're saying, if you're constantly learning, then I feel like that's when you're delivering a story that people can then pick apart and continue to learn and evolve themselves, because it's evolution. We're not trying to tell a story to tell a fact, you know, or to tell a finality. We're continuing to hopefully evolve, you know, people's consciousness and their minds and things like that too. But I wanted to ask, just while we're here, you said about the ending, you know, the message of where you're going with this thing, to have that in your mind, to have where you're going with this thing, and then, you know, have this ending. Is it crucial to know your ending before you get there, or is that something that you can just allow to come as you sort of write? How do you feel about endings?
I never recommend that you start without knowing a direction. It's like setting off. That's a treacherous journey. I mean, you're just setting off into the wilderness at that point. I always suggest before you start, you should know where you're going. But look, if it ultimately feels like I said, like, hey, this was initially supposed to be a tragedy, but actually I want the couple to get together. Beautiful. Like that, you don't have to like be stuck on that ending, but you should at least have a sense of a general destination. It's my only word of caution. That said, I'm sure, you know, Godard and others were made successful, great, brilliant films that never had an ending. They're still not over. They're still carrying on into the dimension. Because the end, there's no end in the sense that it carries on in the mind of the audience, right? In the mind of the observer. The story is continuing. So I don't know. You just got to follow that magic trail, the stardust.
Thank you.
I think we're coming close to 2:00 for you, Sean. About 10 minutes to go. Should we do one last question, and then we can wrap it up? Do you have to go now, Sean, or do you have to go at 2 exactly?
Yeah, like 10 minutes is perfect.
Yeah, all right, perfect. That's cool. So we'll have one more. One question I wanted to ask Sean. So far, it's been absolutely amazing. We've all learned so much from you. The next step as a writer, so you've written something and you perfected it as much as you can, or it's at a good level where you're ready to send out. What's the process, and where would you, I know you touched upon it before about finding a producer, but in terms of kind of reaching out to people, making connections and doing the business side of stuff, where do you go with that, or what advice would you have for that?
Oh, I mean, I'm not a great networker. There are a lot of people that are much better. You know, they like go to the events and like they make friends. I mean, obviously a lot of you guys have been to like acting schools, so you're making, you know, friends from that. Oftentimes the schools themselves might like help making introduction or something. I mean, it's just, you have to trust that process, right? Like who's going to ultimately, read your material. It just starts by putting yourself out there and I don't know how like a lot of the managers and agencies work. I honestly have never really done stuff through them for the most part. It's just more, again, like I don't even know how do people appear in your life? They just they just come into your life in different weird ways, right? And you trust that journey and that process. So I can't really say like one direct route, because obviously like you're submitting to festivals. You can show up to like film festivals. You can just network amongst the people that you already are knowing and getting introduced to, and next thing you know, it's like someone that reads your stuff or it loves it or resonates with it. I really don't know where to begin, and obviously everyone has a different vantage point. It's like my vantage point was like, yeah, like I had a lot more access to people in Hollywood than others, but at the same time, it wasn't like I was hanging out with them and I had a huge Rolodex. I just kind of still did. My first film, Greystone, actually just happened because I met this guy, Alex, who was like friends with my father, and he was breaking into this haunted mental hospital. And I was like, that sounds like a great journey. Let's go on it. And we broke into the place the next night, had an adventure, wrote a script about it the next day. That probably took like a couple of weeks, and had the first draft. And then but how did I get it made? I was talking to a young producer who I had known from, she was an assistant to another, to a more known producer, Hollywood guy. So she was his assistant. She was aspiring to be a producer. This was going to be her first gig. And, she had her certain Rolodex again from like being an assistant, but, it wasn't like there was any like path. It was just like, here's the red carpet. You kind of make it up as you go. So like, I talked to an investor, like, he put some money, the money fell apart, like all these things happen along the way that just, it's very typical, like, independent filmmaking story. You go out there to shoot, the money's not there, you kind of like wing it, you shoot a little bit, you make a teaser, you share it around. Someone that saw it was like, hey, my buddy's, producing, maybe he can get you some money. He got us some money, but then he fell apart. Like, it was just a disaster after disaster. But we kind of like kept keeping the car, like, okay, just get 4 wheels in the car. Okay. As long as the 4 wheels are on the car, even if there's no roof, you just keep driving up. The door fell off. Okay. Just keep going. We just had to get there. The car is falling apart, but just get to the end. And, that was my first experience, making a film. It took 3 years to get that done. And there was no carte blanche to like, yeah, you've done it. It's like, no, okay, you're done. Next one. What's next? I mean, that's just it. It's a process. It's nothing that you can say like, this is how it's done. Here's the book. If it was that simple, everyone would be doing it.
That's very true. No, that's cool. Now I think, should we wrap it up? I think, has anyone else got any other questions before? Anyone? No? Right. I think that's, perfect. Okay, cool. Thank you very much for your time, Sean. It's been amazing. We've learned so much, and we really, really appreciate. You guys are on mute, by the way.
Thank you.
No, thank you guys, and it's been fun. And also, I was mentioning, like, if you guys have stuff that you wanted me to read, you're welcome to send to me. And like, I know you have like my email and my Facebook. You're more than welcome to share. If anyone wants to connect with me on Facebook or social, or even just like send me email me the material, and I'll read it as soon as I can. Give you some feedback.
That'd be amazing, Sean. That'd be cool. And then we're going to try and invite somebody like once a month, and it'd be lovely to have you back at some point in the future as well, just for kind of just see how we're progressing and stuff. So that's cool. Once again, thank you very much, Sean. We'll let you head off. We'll let you head off now, and then I'll speak to you soon, Sean. If you guys want to hold on for a second, we'll have a little chat after. Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun, really, and we'll hopefully hear from you soon.
Thanks, Sean. See you later.
Thank you so much, Sean.